Hey everybody, John chapter 6 today. We're getting through this. So John chapter 6, besides it being really long, 70 verses, hopefully you got all the way through the chapter. But hey, in John chapter 6, Jesus talks about some interesting things. Of course, there's the really cool story of how Jesus feeds 5,000 people with just a couple loaves of bread and some fish. That's always awesome to see. And I always like how Jesus fed them first and then gave them the message. They got to listen to the sermon on a full stomach. And then Jesus follows that up with the disciples being sent out in the boat to go out to sea. And then, of course, the storm comes and Jesus walks on the water in the midst of the storm. I always think that's really awesome. But the part I want to talk about a little bit in detail today is the part where Jesus refers to himself as the bread of life. He says, I am the bread of life. He says this a couple of times in chapter 6. The first time is when he's talking to them in verse 35. He says, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will not hunger, and he who believes in me will never thirst. And he's relating this all back to the story of Moses. And if you remember this, I think it's interesting that Jesus, while he's talking to the Jews, he knows that the Jews understand their past, that they know their history, they know the stories, they know what God has done for them, right? So he is trying to speak to them in a way that they will grasp it and understand it. And so he's referring to Moses, and he does this several times throughout John. We've already seen it with the way he talked about the story and the serpents. And so he does it again, and this time he's reminding them that, do you guys remember when Moses was in the wilderness with the Israelites and they didn't have any food, so God provided for them food. It was called manna, and it was on the ground every day. Every day they would wake up, they'd gather the manna, they would eat their manna, and they would be filled, right? Now, they weren't always satisfied with that. They grumbled at that from time to time. But the point is that God, through the manna, sustained them while they were in the wilderness. God gave them exactly what they needed when they needed it so that they could have life, so that they could survive. And so what Jesus is saying is I'm that manna. Like, just as God gave manna from heaven, it wasn't Moses that provided that manna. God provided that manna. And now he's saying, and now God is still providing for you that manna, but now that manna comes in me, right? Jesus is saying, I am that manna. That's what he means when he says, I am the bread of life. What he's saying is, I have come to give you everything you need to be sustained. I have come to give you everything you need to have life. I have come to give you everything that you need to survive. That's that manna. And so, every once in a while, hopefully once a month, we take communion, where we pass out the little cups with grape juice, and we pass out the little pieces of bread, and sometimes it's really good and sometimes it's not, right? Did any of you take the prepackaged communion that we used here a while back and handed out? The grape juice was horrible. The bread was horrible. It was bad. But the point of it is not the taste, right? The point of it is the symbolism. And so when we take of that bread, we're symbolizing the body of Christ. We're symbolizing the fact, the reality that Jesus is our bread of life. He is sustaining us. And not only that, but in being the bread of life in the Old Testament, the manna came from heaven to provide for them. Jesus has come from heaven. He has physically and literally come to us. So we take that bread, it's symbolism, and it represents the fact that Jesus has come. He has invaded our lives. He has come to this place, not to judge us or condemn us, but to give us sustenance, to give us life. So that's what we're doing every time we take communion. He says, I am the bread of life. I am, in verse 51, I am the living bread that came down out of heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And the bread also which I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. He's going to give himself to us, and we need to consume him. right? We need to allow him to invade our lives. We need to allow him into our life. We need to consume him. Not literally eat of his flesh and drink of his blood, but we need to consume him. When you eat and drink, those things become a part of your body, right? And give you what you need, the energy you need. Same thing with Jesus. We've got to consume him if we want him to give us the life that he's promising. We can't ask Jesus to give us life from a distance. We've got to invite him, allow him to be a part of us if we want the life that he's talking about. Now, this teaching was hard for the Jews to understand. And for those who've been following Jesus, I want you to know that there were more than 12 disciples. There were more than 12 people that were following Jesus. There were hundreds of people that were following Jesus that would call themselves a disciple. And this teaching that Jesus was giving them, this truth, was hard for people to hear. Some of them didn't understand it, they didn't comprehend it, they didn't get it, they didn't like it. And so in verse 66, as a result of this teaching, many of his disciples withdrew and stopped following him. So the idea of consuming Christ, of allowing Christ to invade our lives, that might not be an easy thing for us to comprehend, to grasp, or even to want, right? But I love the fact that in consuming Christ, he's always going to give us what we need, even if we don't like it. Truth is hard, and truth isn't always easy to swallow. There are things that you need to eat because it's good for you, whether you like it or not. Jesus is always going to give us what we need, and when we ask Jesus and we allow him to invade our life, we're asking for him to always give us what we need. And so we have a choice, though, when Jesus gives us what we need. When he gives us that truth, we can receive it and allow him to do the work of transforming us, or we can reject it and walk away. I want to challenge you today to consume Christ and receive him, not to reject him. Be like the 12 disciples that stuck around through the hard truth and the hard teachings and allowed Christ to be a part of every aspect of their life. Consume him today. Even if it's difficult, even if it's hard, even if the truth hurts and we feel convicted, consume him, because he's who you need. He's the one that's going to sustain us. Well, guys, God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow for John chapter 7.